The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Safeway stores.
This roast turkey is just a shell of its former self. All the central bones have been removed. You don't have to carve it, you just slice it right down the middle. It's a turkey ballotine. See how to bone a turkey today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. This 8.5-pound turkey is a tender young fryer turkey, and it will serve 6 to 8 people if you roast it just as it is in the usual manner. But if you bone it and put in a lovely meat stuffing, it'll serve, oh heavens, twice as many people, possibly 15. Most people think boning is the kind of thing that only chefs do, that it's hideously complicated and ordinary. People like us wouldn't think of boning a turkey. But all you need to do is see it done, and then you can do it immediately yourself. Now, you wouldn't usually serve a turkey sitting up, though it looks rather cute. You serve it lying down, so if you cut up through the back of it, you're never going to see that the back has been slit. And that's the way you start in boning a turkey. You take a very small, sharp knife like this, and these you can usually get at a hardware store or at a butcher's supply store. And you take your knife and you just cut right down through the skin, right down through the backbone. You see, there's your backbone there. And then you just start boning, and the theory is, and the way it works, is that you always cut against the bone and never against the skin, because what we're trying to do is to get the skin and all the meat removed in one piece without tearing it, and then when the carcass is out, you can stuff the turkey. You see, I'm just cutting right down the backbone, and I've come here to a nice piece of dark meat. This is the oyster, which is just above the second joint. And you just cut right against that, and you keep going in a parallel way, sort of up and down the backbone, and as always cutting and scraping against the flesh. Now here's this other oyster of dark meat here, which is again is on the lower part of the second joint. Now I'm going to go up a little farther along, up towards the neck. And when you come up towards the neck, you see there's your wing and the shoulder up here, and there's a little bone here, which you can feel. You probably can't see it. And you scrape the skin around that. You see, there's that little bone there. That's sort of a shoulder blade. Then I'm coming down again parallel. You can see part of the rib cage there. And now when I get down again to this part, this bone here is the ball joint of the second joint, which is attached to the carcass. And you just cut it. You see that when you wiggle that back and forth, you can see that bone moving. And the bone is attached to the carcass by some ligaments that look sort of like pieces of white string. And you cut right around that bone, and you will cut through the ligaments. You just sort of keep cutting and forcing with your knife. You can see that you have to have a sort of a tough little knife, because you have to force a bit. Now I'm beginning to separate those bones, and then when I've come down there, you see that bone is now separated. So I continue scraping along, and now the meat is separating from the rib cage. Then I come back up here, and you have your wing, which is attached to the shoulder blade, again by some ligaments. So you cut in between the shoulder blade and the end of your wing bone, and you just come right down through there. You can now see there's your ball joint attaching the wing to the shoulder. And you'll just do the same thing, cutting through it, sort of around and through. And now you see that is separated. And now we come into the heartland where all the white meat is. And again, you just keep scraping and pulling. There's sort of a little extra bone there against the rib cage. I don't know what that is, but you cut around on the other side of it. And then when you come down, you see here you have your tail skin, and you cut right through that because we're not going to use this tail piece, and that separates this lower section. You see I'm scraping all the time. It's a scraping and a finger movement. Now we're coming up again towards the top part. But as you can see, if you're always scraping against the bone, you cannot cut through the skin. Now we've come down practically to the top of the ribs, and I'm going to top of the breastbone. I'm going to reform it again so you can see where we've come. We've come just about to the edge here, and we're coming now to a very delicate point because this is where the ridge of your breastbone is, and the skin over this is very, very delicate, and at this point you want to be extremely careful because you do not want to cut through this skin. So when you come to this point here, you just come to the edge of that breastbone, and then you stop and do the other side. So there, I'll reform it again, and then we turn it over and do the second side. I've turned it the wrong way. And you see, there's where we slit the skin along the backbone, so you just continue doing exactly the same thing, cutting and scraping against the bones. Now I'm coming again to this shoulder blade where the wing attaches up here. You can see once you've seen this done, you can immediately do it yourself because there isn't anything complicated about it. If you just remember that scraping against the bone. Now I'm coming again to this ball joint attaching the wing to the carcass, so I'm going to cut through that. One of these young turkeys is much easier to do than a great big one. The first one that I ever did, I got a turkey at a sale just after New Year's, and it was 30 pounds. It was just enormous. And I had lots of fun boning it, but I found that the joints, the ligaments attaching the joints were so tough that it was rather hard to do, and it was a rather heavy piece of meat. Now I'm coming again to the back and scraping against the backbone. And we have again this oyster of dark meat down towards the tail, and here was the one that was in front. There are some people who, I don't know why, I guess it's sort of a tour de force, feel that you have to bone the turkey from the neck end, leaving the whole skin whole, but I can't see any reason for doing that because you wouldn't ever serve the turkey sitting up. Now here again we have the ball joint that attaches the second joint to the carcass, and again you cut right around that and sort of force it. You can feel when it begins to give away. See, now that the second joint is loose. You would bone any poultry the same way, a duck or a big chicken or a capon, because the bone structure is exactly the same. I chose a turkey because it's so nice and big. Now here again we cut through the skin here to release that tail piece. Now we're now coming down into the white meat. You see, I'm just cutting, scraping, and pulling. Now we're coming down towards that very delicate part where the meat goes over the ridge of the breastbone. I've got here, there's the wishbone there. I'm just cutting up around that. Now I'm coming just to this critical edge here. You can see there's just the edge of it there. And keep cutting against the bone. Now I'm going to reform it, because it's every once in a while, if you get mixed up and wonder where you are, just fold the skin back up over the turkey and you see what you've got. You see, when you lift it up, you can feel all that meat. It's sort of just like a blanket. Then lift it up there, and you see we have just the attachment here over the breastbone. So, and that's the part that is the most delicate, so that we have to be very careful with. So turn it over, and you can see when you're lifting up your carcass there, you have it practically free. And take your knife, and then this is where scraping a bit against the bone is the most important part. And very, very delicately cut down. And then cut right against the bone. If by any chance you make a mistake and have cut through the skin, you can patch it later, and I'll show you when we get to that. Now I'm turning it around, and I'm going to cut right against the bone. You see, you cut, it's a cut and scrape. I'm just being very delicate here, and if I get a little bit of the bone onto the skin, that's better than cutting the skin. There. Now here's your carcass. You can see why this is called a keel, because that does look like the keel of the boat. If it were upside down, that looks as though it were a keel. And the carcass now, you whack it up and then use that for soup. It makes a delicious turkey soup. Now, we have you see, if I reform our turkey, you can still see that it's a turkey. See, there it's got the wing bones and the legs left in. And then when you turn it over, you have this beautiful meat here. And then you can go as far as you want on the boning. After you've gotten your central carcass out, you can, if you wish, you can take out all the bones, the second joint bones here, and the drumstick bones. And the wing bones would be difficult to get out, except you'd have to cut it off here, and then you could take this bone out here. This all depends on how fancy you want to be. And if you could even go so far as to take the meat out of the drumsticks and then put a stuffing in if you wanted to. But we're not going to be so fancy this time. What we're going to do is to cut off this part of the wing here, which is just a sort of a very bony section, and just take a big knife and go whack. And then you'd save that for your soup, and whack off the other side. Because we want this one, we're going to do it in the simplest way, and we want the turkey to look still like a turkey. But what you do want to do is to take out the bones of the second joint, which run along there. And with this, you see there's your ball joint, and you just cut around the meat, being careful always to use that scraping against the bone system. And when you're boning anything, be sure and try and make it a habit always to cut away from you so that you can't cut yourself. It's just as important not to cut yourself as to cut the turkey skin. See, I'm just scraping the meat away from the bone there. And you see these little ligaments that are attached onto it. You can imagine that 30-pound turkey I did. It was really something, because there was just so much meat on it. Now we've come down to the ball joint, which is attaching the second joint to the drumstick. Well, that comes out very easily with just sort of a scrape and a twist. And there's your second joint bone, and that you also save for your soup. And then you take out the bone the same way on the second side. See, I cut the skin away, and then I just start scraping down the bone. Just keep turning and scraping. Then I'm now practically down to the end of it, to the little ball joint. That again, just holding on to one end and just twisting the bone around. There it comes. There it's out. And now, you see you have all of this meat here that is attached to the skin. And if you're going to take this meat out, you want to be very careful that you don't slit the skin while you're doing it. And this is your dark meat where the second joints were. And then up here, where your breastbone was, right down through here, are the two sides of your white meat. And you'll notice that there's a little tendon that's sticking out from the white meat. And that you should take off. And just take your knife and hold on to one end of it and just scrape down either side. And as this is usually rather slimy, hold on to it with the edge of a towel. And then see, I'm just pulling and scraping all the way down. And there's your tendon. You see, that would be something you definitely would want out, but that can also go into your soup pot. And then here's the tendon on the other side. So again, grasp it with a towel and scrape down either side with your knife. It's sort of a scraping and pulling method. There it is again. And now if you wanted to take out this white meat, see, this is sort of a flap here, and this is called the filet mignon. And if you wanted to take that out and just, say, saute it for an intimate little dinner, you could just cut that out, and then you could put something else in. But see, that makes a lovely piece of meat. You could take that out on each side. See, that's lovely tender meat. And then also, if you wanted to, you can take a knife and slice off some of the white meat. If you're using a meat stuffing, you could slice off some of the white meat and just like this and cut it into strips. I just wanted you to see the various things that you could do, because there's so many different things that you can do once you get your meat exposed. And what this, you can slice off any of this dark meat, and then if you're having a meat stuffing, you could grind it into your stuffing. But we're going to do our turkey in the most simple way. So I'm going to put the meat back in again. As you can see, with this, we have boned it all to this point in probably less than, well, maybe about 15 minutes. Of course, I've done 2 or 3 turkeys before, and it's such fun to do. As you can see, that once you get the principle of just cutting down the backbone and then just start scraping against the bone, then you won't have any trouble doing it. It's just a question of doing your first one. And so now, as we're going to do it a perfectly plain roast, we will season with salt and pepper all the meat here, probably about half a teaspoon of salt, and then some good grinds of pepper. I always like to use a pepper grinder because I think the pepper has more taste. And then if you want to, you can put in you can sprinkle the flesh with a little bit of cognac. Of course, you don't have to do that, but it's a rather French thing. And when you're sprinkling, put your finger over the bottle. That's only maybe, less than a tablespoon of cognac, but it sort of, I think, makes you feel good when you're doing it. And then we're ready to put in the stuffing. And you can use, I've kept the stuffing in the refrigerator. You can use any kind of a stuffing you normally would use for turkey. I'm using a meat pâté stuffing, a French veal ham and ground veal ham and pork stuffing. And if you're going to have a meat stuffing, dip your hands in cold water and then just put the stuffing on. I've got about 6 cups here, and I'm not exactly sure how much I want. I think it'll take about 6 cups. And you want the stuffing to hold together, so I have whatever stuffing you use 1 egg for every 2 cups of stuffing. Then the turkey gets folded around the stuffing, and then you either sew or skewer the turkey meat around the stuffing. I always like to sew, so I shall sew, but you could perfectly well use skewers. And so we have an awful lot of turkey skin there, so I'm going to cut off a bit of it, because I might want that for patching later. And then just start out with making a knot up here and tying one end of your string. There isn't any sort of real rule for this at all. You sort of do it the way you think the stuffing is going to hold together. But one thing you want to be sure is that you do not overstuff your turkey, because the stuffing usually swells a little bit and you don't want it to burst out. Skewers certainly work perfectly well, but I don't know. Yes, I think they'd work perfectly well. I just don't happen to use them because I like to sew. Then you just sew it right down as though you were sewing a seam. Then all of these, after the turkey's been roasted, all of these stitches come out. Now, other stuffings that you could make, for instance, you could make a chestnut and sausage stuffing, which would be perfectly delicious. But any stuffing you normally would use for turkey, but you want to be sure and have the eggs in, so that, because you want, when you carve the turkey, that for the stuffing to hold together. Now I've come down to the bottom part here. You can see if you have too much stuffing in, you'd stretch the skin too much and it might burst while it was roasting. Then it comes over. Then we have the final knot for the end. And all of this, when you've finished roasting, you just cut the stuffing off. I mean, you cut the strings off. And then, now this is a point. This looks very funny now. Now, if by any chance you have slit the skin, say that you'd slit the skin there, you'd take a little bit of your neck skin that you would save and just patch the skin, and then you take a needle and thread and you just sew it up just as though you were patching a sheet. And if you have the skin left, you just would use that for add that to your soup pot. And now, you see this hardly looks like a turkey now, all spread out. So what we're going to do is to tie it. And we're going to keep the legs together by sticking a big needle, like a knitting needle or anything, right through the legs here. And then take some string. I have here some corned beef twine, which I bought from my butcher, and I like it very much for this kind of tying. And loop it. Now let's see, I'll start up here and then loop it around. This is going to give it a little better shape by holding the legs up a bit. You see, already just doing like this, it's looking a little bit more like a turkey. And then we want to tie the wings together. And you want 2 ties, one at the bottom and one at the top. This turkey's just going to roast breast up all the time, so we don't have to worry about turning it. I guess I'll cut that off first. What you want is some white string that's sort of tough but soft, so that it's easy to tie. And get a second tie at the lower part of the wings, because that'll hold them to the body. Now it's beginning to get a turkey shape. And you can see now why it's called a ballotine, because ballotine in French means a bale or a roll. And you can, with some of the, I'm now tying the legs together at the bottom so they'll stay down while the turkey's roasting. And you can put another tie if you want to through the middle, but I don't think it needs it. And so now our turkey is all ready for roasting. It goes into a shallow roasting pan. First you baste it with melted fat and then put it into your shallow roasting pan, and you roast it just as you would a normal turkey. I always like to use a meat thermometer because then I know exactly when it's done. I got this for 98 cents at my supermarket. And you just stick it right, I'm just going to stick it under the elbow and let it go right through into the middle of the turkey. Because the point always has to be into the middle, and whenever you're using one, be sure if you have any bones that the meat thermometer doesn't hit any of the bones. And the turkey is done at a meat thermometer reading of 180 to 185. Then after you've basted it with fat, you put it in a 350-degree oven. And then keep basting it with fat and the juices in the pan about every half hour. And then when it has gotten nice and brown, turn the oven down to 350. And this 8.5-pound turkey with about 6 cups of stuffing will take 3 hours and a quarter to 3 hours and a half. And then when the turkey is done, you want to take it out of the oven, remove all the strings, and let the turkey rest for 20 to 30 minutes, because you want to be sure that the stuffing is sort of firmed up so that you can easily slice it. And then you want to pour your sauce over it, and then you're ready to go. And you can serve it either hot or you can serve it cold. And if you served it hot, it's very good with chestnuts and Brussels sprouts and a nice gravy made out of the drippings. And then to carve it, see, all you need to do is to take the wings off, which come off very easily. See, we have only 4 bones in this turkey. And once your wings are off, you can just slice it right through. I don't seem to have gotten that wing off there. And so now I've shown you how to bone and carve a turkey and what fun it is, and it's something anyone can do. So go ahead and do it. It's so good. That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.